objective is to talk about hiring or employee search versus recruiting. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on hiring because I don't think it's worthwhile, because basically all you do with hiring is to put out an advertisement and hope the right person applies and hope the right person is chosen for an interview, and then maybe you'll be lucky. With recruiting, you are really getting to understand your organization. You're putting out that information about your organization, the culture, the type of person, the personality, the skills that you're looking for in that person. So you really need to understand that. In your packets today, I have the 10 tips that I'm going to be talking about for recruiting, and there's a second page that has recruiting tips. It has tips on interviewing, and a list of all the different blogs for HR kinds of things and tips that you may want to go onto my website. So feel free to look at those. And anything that I'm talking about today is in more detail on my blog. So that will be helpful if you didn't take notes or you missed the point. You'll be able to do that. So the first thing you want to do, how do we get started for recruiting? Well, you want to review the position that you're looking for. You want to figure out what the job description says. Is it the right job description? Do you have a job description? Do you need to change the job description? Because maybe your organization has changed and you need to find more of a supervisor rather than a worker bee. You may want to find someone with more technical background. Maybe your organization is becoming more IT oriented, so you would want to get more of that type of person. So you would change the position. It's great to do that when you have a vacancy. So once you find out what you want to do with this position, you would write up a job description. And one of the things that I brought with me that I'll pass around is a whole bunch of sample job descriptions. What you want to make sure is in your job description, you identify it on the top of the position, what's its purpose, the essential functions. That term is a term from the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. What are the most important things that a person has to do to be able to function in this job? Then we go into what are the training and education issues? What is their job environment? Are they outside doing technician kind of work, as you talked about? Are they in a bank, sitting behind a teller's thing? And then I have a checklist for their positions in the sense of equipment used and the kinds of things that they do. Are they sitting a lot, are they standing a lot, driving a lot? All of this is very important for your ADA, with the Americans with Disabilities Act, so you can show that if a person has to lift and they can't lift, you can't hire them unless there's something you can do to help them lift. It also is perfect for workers' comp, so you can give it to the doctor, and the doctor will look at this and say, they can do this only a couple of hours a day, but after 2 weeks, they'll be able to do full duty again. So here are some samples. You can pass that around and just leave it in the back when you're done. You really want to know what your organization is doing, why you need this position, what level you want to put it at. Are there different resources to do? So then the next step that I do is I create a profile, which is a brochure, and I'll pass these around later. But here's an executive director position. It's you can do it as an email, a PDF, as an actual document you send out. It is very important when you're recruiting to actually tell people what you're looking for. What is your organization about? What's your company about? Why are you looking for this position? What are the issues? So by telling candidates that you have this beautiful brochure, colored brochure, pictures, get them all interested in your organization, the things you do. What it does is it makes you look better than the next guy that is advertising for the same position. It puts you above everybody else. It emphasizes that you really find this position important and that you want people to know about it and know about your organization. So it comes in many formats. I usually do it in a document like this. I also email a PDF to people, and it grabs their attention because it's bright and colorful. You want to use catchy phrases to attract their attention, and tell them about your organization. Now, I do a lot of executive searches, and when we do those, we go to the organization, and we spend 2 to 3 days learning about the organization. Find out who are the stakeholders, who are the managers, who are the employees, what is their function, why are they doing this thing, why are they different from someone else. And we spend 2 to 3 days learning about the organization, getting input from everybody, and getting input from their clients, their vendors, all of the people that work for them, so that we understand the culture of the organization, and we put that into the profile so that we publicize with a bang. We are hometown friendly type of thing. You might want to emphasize that since you're a credit union, or talk about the credit union aspect of the bank. You're hiring a recruiter for your organization. Talk about the kinds of companies you work with, those types of things. Those are the kinds of things that you want to emphasize in this profile. In addition to that, it will include your description of the agency, your financial information, especially if it's a CFO kind of position or a CEO position. You want them to know what's the budget, how big is your organization. If you're just hiring someone within a department of your organization, then you want to talk about what that department's about. You take that job description you just developed, and you put it out there with all the information, so you don't have to put the exact job description because those are sometimes boring, but you put the summary of that. The mission statement of the organization, the positives about the position, what have been some of the accomplishments of your organization, accomplishments of the position, organizational culture, the personal characteristics that are needed for this position. You know, if someone needs, with the technician stuff, they really need to have a good knowledge of all the different computer systems out there. So that may be, you may want to actually list which computer systems you're using, or which technology you're using, or other technologies that if they use that, they'll know how to use this one. You want to talk about management style if you're doing a management position. You can also do this process for an entry-level position. So even a secretary, or a laborer, or you know, the IT type of person, that sort of professional level position. You can do this for all of them. Once you've put this profile together, you can use it over and over again, because you've got everything you want to talk about your organization already. All you have to do is change what is this position. And if you put out a profile for a secretary position, administrative assistant, an executive assistant, people are going to say, wow, this company is special, look at that. Just for this kind of position, they're putting out this whole profile, all these pictures, talking about the company, giving the mission statement, those kinds of things. It doesn't have to be as big when you compare to the executive ones that we do. So it shows your commitment to your organization and commitment to your positions. So I'm going to pass these around. I've done a whole bunch of these, and again, just leave them at the back of the room. Have very different kinds of pictures on them, different types of position. This is for the City of Bridgeport. I currently am working on a police chief for the City of Bridgeport, so I will be using these pictures again. I gave them a discount because I was using them again. So I think the profile really emphasizes what you need about your position, and it sets you apart. So now that you've done the job description, put together the profile, you got to develop a timetable. So the way you develop a timetable for this process of recruiting is you figure out when you want the person to start and work your way backwards. However, you have to be flexible because something always happens. You want to figure out when you want them to start, and when you're going to do your interviewing, the kinds of things that you put together for this timetable, working backwards. You figure out the date and then work backwards, and you make sure you have the evaluation process for the job description, the review of the job description, the development of the advertisement and the profile, and then give yourself enough time for advertising. I always recommend 2 weeks for entry-level positions and 3 to 4 weeks for higher-level positions. Then you need time for proactively recruiting, and I'll talk about what proactively recruiting is about. Screening the applications, ranking them, figuring out who your top ones, and then testing. And there are written tests, and oral tests, and interviews, and examinations, and telephone interviews, driving tests if you have a position that's going to be driving for you. I did a dispatch test once. This was really fun. We put people in front of a desk, and they had a radio in their hand, they had a telephone, and they had the rules and regulations in front of them of what they were to do. And we would call them and tell them that, I see someone robbing my neighbor's house. And they give the address, and then they call police car number 2, because that was the road for that one. And we had a person call and say, I'm having a baby, I need an ambulance. You know, those kinds of things. So they actually went through a process. And dispatchers are either very quiet or very in a situation where it's so rushed that they don't know what's going on. So we put them through this practical exam. I've also done for the snowplow drivers, even though we don't get a lot of snow here. I came from Connecticut and we had a lot of snow. So we would put together a test where they get into those big plow trucks, and we put out white cones and orange cones. And they had to knock down the white cones because the orange cones were cars and mailboxes. So they were not supposed to knock down the orange cones. So they got a point for the white cones and a point off if they hit an orange cone. Because some people get so nervous about the orange cones that they didn't even hit the snow, the white cones. So it was a way to tell if they knew how to do the snow plowing. So there's all kinds of tests. You also want to interview them with your staff. Then you might have a second interview or final interview, background reference checks, and then a job offer. The unfortunate part about this is usually your vacancies aren't a new position and you know when you want them to start. They're usually, someone comes to you and says, I'm retiring. Sometimes they give you 2 or 3 months and you have enough time. Sometimes they say, I'm sorry, I got a new job and I'm leaving in 2 weeks. My husband just got a job, my wife just got a job, we're moving to another state, and you have no time whatsoever, so you want to move quickly. That is also the advantage of why having the profile ready about your organization makes it easy to get started quickly. So once you've put your timetable together, you want to do your advertising. Again, another difficult area in the sense that how much do you really want to do? You want to make sure you don't go over your budget because you could advertise everywhere and that will cost you a lot of money. But what you really want to do is target your audience. So if I'm hiring a CFO, a finance person, I'm going to target the CPA organizations, I'm going to target the finance organizations, I'm going to advertise there. I'm not going to advertise in the local newspaper because how many people are looking there? But finance directors are always looking at their finance association's website. Most of the organizations now have a website, and you can advertise there, and they go out to all of their members on a regular basis. I'm on a number list where I get the listing of what jobs are opening. You might get those yourself. If I'm looking for an HR director, I'm going to go to the Society of Human Resources Management. It's called SHRM, and they have a number of chapters. I will advertise with them. I'm not going to advertise in newspapers or Indeed. I hate to do that to the newspapers and hate to do that to Indeed, but I have not gotten good luck with them because they're not focusing on the position. I once put out a position for a public works director who's in charge of the roads and the snow and the landscaping and all of those things in our city. and somehow Indeed got it because I didn't put it on Indeed. I just put it on the Public Works Association, and I've got 7 applications. All of them had nothing to do with public works. One waitress who wanted to be a Public Works director. Definitely not what you want to do. You guys have so much to do with your companies, so much work to do. You don't want to spend the time reading through garbage resumes. So focusing on the organization. With the other thing that you need to think about is the national versus local advertising. With entry-level positions, you really want to advertise locally, so you want to do the local advertisements that are around in Louisville if you're located here, because most people aren't going to move from another state for an entry-level position, unless they're moving here already with a spouse for some reason. Whereas professional organizations, you definitely want to do a national search. You'd be so surprised how many people want to come home or live near friends and family, so that just because you say, well, why would anyone want to come here from California?
I would.
We have one person who came from California because it's cheaper here than California. It is cheaper here from Connecticut also. You have that situation where you never know why people are looking for, and Louisville is an excellent, excellent market in the sense of employees. People want to live in this area. It's an exciting place to be. It's got all of the activities, and you're close to a lot of things. So definitely do a national search. And one of the things we find is much harder to move from one part of the state to another part of the state compared to moving, you know, if you're coming from California or from Connecticut like myself, you know you're going to be moving. You're going to be packing up. So it doesn't matter where you're moving to, you're going to have to pack up the whole house. So people will figure those things out. One of the searches I did, they had advertised in the local newspaper and didn't get anyone. I went in and did a focused project of working on the professional side, and we tripled the number of applications. It really makes a difference. You want to focus in on the professionals and the organizations and the technicians and the computer people, if that's the kind of people you're looking for. So how do you do, I said I would be talking about recruiting and targeting employees. So many times when we go and talk with the organizations, they know of somebody who would be good, who used to work here, or they heard of someone who is looking, or they have names of people from their associations that would know of people that are looking. They will give us that, and we will call them directly. If I don't have those names, then I go to those professional organizations. I mentioned about the SHRM group for the HR group. They have chapters in every state, and some states have more than one chapter. And you can email the officers, because their names are there, their emails are there, and let them know, and you send them that beautiful, colorful profile, and tell them about the exciting job and why it's such a great place to live, why it's a great organization, and you send out that email with the profile to the people in those associations. The members that are officers in the different associations always know who's looking for a job, because they know all their members. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll actually put it on their website for you for nothing, or they will send it out in their listserv to their members. So that you will, everybody will get. So there's 400 people that got an email from you, and you didn't even know that you were going to approach that many people. So it's wonderful. So those are the people you want to go, you want to target. I just did a project for Metro Nashville, and they were having a very hard time getting anyone for their position, and I ended up doing 900 emails to get the word out. You never know who's going to know someone. Just like we do, it's networking. Just like we do networking for our businesses, you want to network for the employment process and recruiting process. So you end up doing a lot of networking by approaching different people that you may not even know. You definitely want to put it on your LinkedIn. You want to talk to your colleagues, spread the word, give them a profile. You're at a meeting like this and you're looking for employees, put it out there, put the profile out there. It attracts people's attention. I have many times gotten people to call me up and say, I really wasn't looking for a job, but this looks really interesting. Can you tell me more about it? And that's how we get good candidates. So, so now you've done all your recruiting, you've done your advertisement, you've done your profile, so now the resumes are coming in. So you have to evaluate them, review them. I start off with putting together a Excel sheet with the names, first name, last name, email, and then create a list and put a little note, meets the qualifications or does not meet the qualifications. The other thing is with that list, you can also do an email. Thank you very much for your resume. We will be reviewing the next 2 weeks. We will get back to you one way or the other. And I always contact the ones that don't meet the qualifications saying, we are moving forward, your application hasn't been moved forward because you didn't meet the minimum qualification, or we had so many people that over-exceeded the qualifications that we're looking at those people first. And then when you get those resumes in, and of course there are processes, some places have the application, but when I'm working with most people, I say, let's start with the resume. And if you have an application process, once we know they're qualified, then we'll put them through your application process if that's what you want to do. But many, the higher level positions, executive positions, an engineering position, you can't always tell if they meet the qualifications because their resumes are broad about all the things they do. They talk about project management, they talk about this, they talk about that. But if your job is environmental engineering, you may not find out if they did that. They may think that you would know it because the name of their company might be environmental engineering, but that's not necessarily they were doing environmental engineering. So you want to know, did they do environmental engineering, civil engineering, are they doing buildings? What are they doing in that field of engineering? So you might have to do a short telephone call to figure out if they're qualified. Once you've got your people that are qualified, there's a number of ways that you can rate the candidates. If you have a lot of candidates, there's the numbering system, there's the ABC from our school days. And so, for example, in the numbering system, if the position requires a bachelor's degree but prefers a master's, then they get more points for the master's. If you ask for 5 years experience but they have 10 years, they get more points for the 10 years. So that the best candidates get on the top. And one of the things I say to people when they're applying to me is, you're absolutely qualified. The problem was your competition was even more qualified. So just keep trying. It depends on who you're competing against, not that you couldn't do the job. So I like to tell them why their application wasn't in the running. So you get that number. Is it important for them to have had the same industry? I find that universities always want someone to have had worked in a university. The medical profession also, like the hospitals, want them to have done your job in the medical profession, even though they may have done very similar work in another. But if that's important to the client or to your organization, then they get more points for that. Whereas some organizations really want diverse people. We need engineers or technicians that have done these kinds of things. It doesn't have to be security like you talked about, but it has to be in this area, because the more we have additional, maybe we'll expand our technicians into other kinds of things. So that is important. So we, as a recruiter, I do whatever the client wants us to do, what's their preferences, and we put that together. Then we have our top candidates. When I'm doing an executive search, I put together a semi-finalist list and a finalist list. So this is a finalist list for CEO, and I give it to the organization for them to review and say, here's your candidates, these are the people that are coming in, and I put together a summary of the candidates. So this is their basic names. I have additional information that's hidden, but what was their background, where are they coming from, what are the fields, what are their education, so that you can see in a quick look. Now this was only 3 candidates, this was the top finalists coming for an interview with a panel. So they could say, okay, this one has 10 years, this one has 11 years, you know, that kind of thing. So they see that, and then I will show you the guy that got the job. We put together a summary of their background, and this little package is their resume and their questionnaire, and I'll talk about questionnaires and written evaluations. Then we've done references on them, and it's a general reference, so we don't identify the person who said what, but it gives them information about what the references were. Then we also give them a background report. You know, because it was CEO, we do a credit check on them, so we show them that information. And then we have a form for the panel to evaluate the candidate compared to the other 2 candidates in this situation. In addition, the book has a list of interview questions for the panel. I put those together for them. And I put together questions you shouldn't ask that are illegal. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And then at the end of the process, we ask the panel to say who's their number 1 candidate, who's their number 2, who's their number 3. And then I take, and sometimes these panels, I've been on one that had a panel of like 10 people. Another one I did was 15. Wow, I remember. Trying to get them to agree on the top candidate is hard, which is why we average their numbers. So we put in who put which person where, and we find out who are the top candidates. So we're very excited when we get a top candidate. And in this situation, for this guy that I just told you got the job, everybody agreed he was the one and only one. They were not interested in the other 2. So then my job was to get him to say yes, and he did, so we're very happy. So I talked about written evaluations. We call it a questionnaire when it's an executive search that we do. If you had a position, you want to know what they've been doing in their job, and their resume is great, and everybody puts all the positive things in their resume, but how much accounting did they do? You know, what kind of accounting did they do? Do they know how to do the entry-level stuff? Do they know how to do journal entries? Do they know how to do these other things? They may not have put that in their resume, so then you give them a questionnaire with some basic questions. Tell us about your education. Did you graduate? Did you do this? What are some of the other classes you've taken that are appropriate for this? Are there certifications? Are you a CPA or not a CPA for the accounting field? Did you end up doing any work in this field or that field? So you ask them those things. How many years did you do it? And so then you've got a comparison to the other candidates. And then I usually do, for the executive types of position, I do a questionnaire that has a number of essay questions. So how did you handle this situation in your organization when you had that situation? In an HR position, you don't have a lot of unions in the state of Kentucky other than Ford and the city and a couple of those, right? But back in Connecticut, almost every organization was in a union. So not all HR people come from a background with union negotiations. So one of the questions I would ask is, when you have a union negotiations and you try to get the employees to pay more health benefits, how did you go about doing that? So we ask those kinds of questions. I'm talked about the fact that I'm doing a police chief search. I haven't figured out what my essay questions are yet for their questionnaire. But so far I have heard from the stakeholders that community policing is a big issue. And of course, in the United States, school shootings. So I will ask them, how have you dealt with it? How have you prepared your department in the past for these types of issues? And how would you move this community forward if you were to be the police chief? Now with entry-level positions, you can do a customer service type of test in the sense of questions. How would you deal with this type of person that walked in the door? A bank teller has to be very nice to everybody, right? If you computer tests with your technicians, if there's a special program and you're only going to take people with that program, you can test them on that. I have many times done things where Excel is needed, the program, and people say, yes, I've used Excel. Well, how did you use Excel? Well, I entered the numbers. Well, that's very different from a position where you might want an accountant or a bookkeeper to create the formulas, set up the system. So I've actually done a test and said, this is the information that we have, put it into an Excel sheet and tell me what the average price is, or the average this, or the average that, or any other formula, you know. And if they don't know how to do a formula, they're not going to be able to do it. They may be able to enter some stuff, but they won't be able to do the formula. So then you know they can do that stuff. And here we have someone who does other types of testing for entry-level administrative people and others, personality tests, testing on the computer, those kinds of things. So she has a staffing agency, they do that testing before they send the people out. So those are all ways that you can test the employee, because people will tell you anything, whether they can do it or not is another thing.